What is up everyone, it is me Dan here with my review for Arrow Season 6 Episode 20 entitled Shifting Allegiances. Now the first thing everyone is going to ask me is where is my review for Episode 19 entitled The Dragon. Now the reason that review is not up on the channel is simply put I didn't have any time that week to record that review. If anybody wants to know my quick thoughts on Episode 19, I really like the episode. I know it's a very divisive episode, but I really enjoyed it. I thought having a focus on the big bad of Ricardo Diaz was a really good decision. I thought him and Black Siren were great in the episode, and just how the episode fleshed out Diaz as a character and his backstory and his reasoning for doing what he's doing. The only thing I really didn't like about that episode were all of the scenes with Felicity, Curtis, and Oliver. They felt like such filler, like they didn't need to be in this episode, but they were for some reason. That's really the only issue I had with it, but other than that, I thought episode 19 was great. So let's get into my review for episode 20. So the first thing I want to talk about with this episode is the Anatoly and Oliver storyline. So in this episode, we finally get Anatoly and Oliver talking a bit more, and Oliver trying to break through to Anatoly that, hey, Diaz is not an honourable man, he will backstab you, I've got you a place back in the Bratva, come with me. And their storyline this episode was great. I really enjoyed it. I thought that the two of them were so good. And the reason I loved them on screen together is because they have such a rich history on this show. I mean, obviously, they've known each other since the Season 2 flashbacks. And how their relationship has evolved since then. Since, like, meeting each other as strangers to becoming friends. And then in Season 5, we obviously saw they grew apart from each other and they became enemies. And I'm liking this storyline. I mean, I love David Nichol. I really enjoy him as an actor, and I love what he brings to Anatoly. And just him and Stephen Amell just have such good chemistry together. And I like that in the end of this episode that Anatoly is starting to slowly come towards Oliver in terms of, you know, starting to agree with him more. And I'm really interested to see where they go with his characters, especially since I personally think he could potentially die in the finale of this season or by the end of Season 6. So I'm interested to see where they go with him. The other storyline I want to talk about in this episode is the storyline with New Team Arrow and Diggle. Now, this was a storyline that I really didn't think I was going to enjoy all that much because I have not been the biggest fan of New Team Arrow. Honestly, like, I find them very irritating and very poorly written. But in this episode, they were actually very, very good. I think the big advantage they had was the fact that they were teamed up with Diggle, who obviously I really like as a character, and a lot of fans of Arrow really like as well. So having him in there and having the interactions with him, you know, him trying to say about like how he's sorry about, you know, all the fighting that's gone on between them, and just him interacting with them in general was just very, very good. And I just liked the fact that they weren't annoying. They didn't constantly bring up this feud between New Team Arrow and Original Team Arrow. That was almost nowhere to be found apart from like a few lines that Renee said, who I'll get onto later. But them in general, I really enjoyed. And there was a great action sequence at the end of the episode with all of them where New Team Arrow and Argus with Diggle are taking down one of these drug compounds, you know, where the Quadrant is currently operated in Star City, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm just going to point this out. Curtis, for once, actually did something useful other than using his T-spheres. Like, he was actually useful. Like, he was planting all of them, I don't know what you'd call them, but he was planting, like, devices onto all of the trucks with drugs on them that the Argus agents were blowing up using a remote drone. So at least he did something useful. And there was a really cool scene where he threw his T-sphere at a truck and like got one of them markers on there, and the truck blows up. It was something that felt like that scene in The Dark Knight where the Joker's in that truck and it gets tipped over. Like, it reminded me of that, and just it was a really cool action sequence in general. New Team Arrow in themselves I thought were very good in this episode because for once they weren't actually irritating. Now, I want to get more in depth into Renee because this is the episode where he finally comes back, because he's been gone from the show for quite some time. I think since episode 14, although I think he did make an appearance in 18, but it was like for about 5 seconds. But Renee returns in this episode, and this wasn't something I was looking forward to because I don't particularly like Renee this season. I think they've done a poor job with his character. But in this episode, they actually gave him a storyline and made his character interesting again, because we find out that he's now suffering from PTSD and the worry that when he goes out onto the field he won't come back, like that when he comes back he won't be alive and he won't be able to see Zoe again. And there's a great conversation in particular that he has with Diggle, because him and Diggle are very similar characters. You know, they're both vigilantes that use guns, they have a history in the army, and they of course have kids. And I just liked their interaction. I can't remember when exactly it was in the episode, but they did have a conversation between them or it might have been a few in the episode, but I really enjoyed them. And I like that they're actually doing something with Renee that isn't constantly bringing up the new Team Arrow versus original Team Arrow feud. Like, it's just so boring at this point. But if they keep on giving him a storyline like this for the rest of the season, hopefully in Season 7, if he's still around then I'm interested to see where they go with his character, and hopefully they can rebuild some of the bridges that they've burnt with him. The other storyline that I have is another storyline about a character moving away from Ricardo Diaz, and that is Black Siren redemption arc. It looks like we're actually going to be getting it, because we had more of that in this episode. Of course, in episode 19, you could kind of tell that in the second half of that episode that Black Siren wasn't exactly 100% with what Ricardo Diaz was doing. And so she basically comes over to Quentin and basically admits to him that she is scared of Ricardo Diaz, and she's only with him just out of fear of what he could do to her or to Quentin. And so Ricardo Diaz asks Quentin to, I think it was to give him permission to operate in a warehouse, basically so the Quadrant can move and traffic drugs from there. Of course, Quentin, being the absolute lad that he is, says no, that he won't do it. But then when Black Siren comes into his office and basically says that you have to sign this or Ricardo Diaz is not going to take no for an answer, he has a change of heart, and the two of them decide that they're actually going to work together to take down Ricardo Diaz. So Black Siren is now officially a double agent, and I'm very interested to see where they go with this, because there are heavy rumours that Quentin will die at the end of this season, which I personally think is going to happen. So if they do more of this storyline with this relationship and the redemption arc for Black Siren, I'm very interested to see what they do with it, because it's finally coming and I've waited too bloody long for it. And then, of course, we have to talk about the big thing that was advertised for this episode, which was, of course, the fight between Oliver and Ricardo Diaz. Now, I thought the fight in itself was very good. It wasn't massively long. It was only about 30 seconds. But it was very, very cool to see. Of course, there was a lot of debate going into this as to who was going to win and how they were going to win it, because, of course, Oliver couldn't win the fight because there's still 3 episodes left, so obviously Oliver wasn't going to beat him. So the question would be, well, how is Ricardo Diaz going to beat him? But they addressed that in this fight, because Oliver clearly has the upper hand against him. He clearly has the upper hand, he's in control, and he literally gets Ricardo Diaz into a headlock and literally tells him to yield or he'll snap his neck. So Ricardo Diaz, being the desperate man that he is, because of course this man will do anything to ensure that he wins, he basically just goes ahead and cheats during the fight and stabs Oliver. And that is kind of like the big moment that makes Anatoly turn against him. But that fight scene in itself was really cool, and I like how they address how Diaz won, because in a way he didn't really win, he cheated. Like, Oliver had him beaten. Oliver could have snapped his neck then and, Oliver would have won. So I like how they addressed that in the episode, and the fight in itself was very, very cool. And then, of course, we get the cliffhanger at the end of the episode where Ricardo Diaz moves up Oliver's trial to the next week, and so he gets taken into custody by the police officers that I presume Diaz are under Diaz's payroll, because the majority of them are at this point. So he gets arrested. He's going to have his trial next week, and this is pretty much just a setup for next week's episode, which has a title number that I can't remember, so I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce it, but it's just a setup for then, and it's a very cool cliffhanger to lead on. I'm very interested to see where they go with next week's episode in terms of what's going to happen, because based on the promo, it looks like it's not going to be a boring court episode. A lot of shit is going to go down, so I'm very interested for that. The only real, nitpick I guess I could have was that sometimes Wild Dog was a little bit irritating. He did have a few moments where he did come across as if he was his old season 6 self, where he's constantly using Hoss too many times. The amount of times he said Hoss in this episode is ridiculous. And some of the times when he brought up the whole new Team Arrow versus original Team Arrow feud were a bit irritating and a bit repetitive, but other than that, I didn't think he was actually that bad in this episode. At least he was bearable. He's certainly an improvement over what we had earlier on this season, but that's the only real fault I could find with this episode. So for my final rating for the episode, I am going to give the episode a 9 out of 10. I think it's a good score for the episode. I'm just so frustrated that we've had to wait until the last third of the season for it to actually get going. It is a bit frustrating because, it was a daunting task getting through those first 15 or so episodes, but I like that. I'm happy that finally it feels like it's going somewhere, and hopefully the last 3 episodes will maintain this quality, because if it does, I think it can salvage, some sort of, you know, positive for this season as a whole, because I think overall the season has been very inconsistent. So if it can at least have a consistent ending, then I'm fine with that. It'll help, you know, paper over the cracks that the season's had. So thank you all for watching my review for this episode. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought about this episode. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you are new, and make sure to like the video and share it with your friends. And with that being said, I will see you all in the next video.